The way, not the destination. Hi, welcome to church. As we're on the way to the cross at Easter, we are going through the scriptures to see exactly what was going on just before Jesus had the triumphal entry and then going to the cross. As we realize at this point, Jesus is doing most of his ministry on the east side of the Jordan River, and he's kind of coming over to Jerusalem and then going back as he's avoiding the authorities who are trying to take his life. So there's quite a bit that's going on in these last few days and weeks before he goes to the cross. And with that, I want to highlight a few of those things that shows the faith of the believers. It shows what they knew and what they didn't know, what they expected and then what actually happened. Now, we understand that the disciples knew that Jesus taught that he was going to die and be resurrected, but they didn't quite believe it. They thought it was going to be an earthly kingdom. That's well taught in churches, but what's not readily taught is that there's many other things that the disciples got wrong on the ways leading up, but they're able to walk it out and find the way and not to realize that faith is just one little box that we put ourselves in. I say this because there's a lot of people that their faith ends up being disrupted when their life is disrupted, or if God doesn't act a way in their life that they expected him to act. And there's a lot of things that Jesus did in the leading up to the cross that confounded all the people. And those who are faithful, they walked it out. They continued. You know what? I know Jesus enough to continue on. And so we need to understand that faith, we need to continually grow, continue to be challenged when things don't go our way, and to stay on so that we don't give up. And then we realize that those who did have perseverance went on to lead an incredible harvest that we're actually experiencing today. So because the first disciples hung in there when they didn't understand what was going on, they were able to figure it out and pass that baton of faith all the way down to us 2,000 years later, half a world away. So I want to encourage you with that, to hang on. When you don't know what's going on in life, you don't know why God is acting certain ways in your life or allowing things to happen, that let us push through. I like to say walk it off. You remember back if you were in Little League and playing baseball and you'd twist your ankle or you'd hurt your leg and the coach would say, walk it off. And knowing that blood flow and circulation helps to get the pain to go away. Well, in the same way, tough actions in faith might mean that we really need to understand that we need to, in faith, walk it off. So we need to realize that we know enough about Jesus to go along the way, to keep following, that it's not a destination until we get to heaven. That he gives us enough to help us to get to where we are going. How else could we possibly ever put God in a box? You know what? That's one of the big things that usually people that fall away in faith in their adult years is because they were given a simple faith as a child and they never honed it and they never persevered through it. And so when they see that God doesn't fit in their little box, the world doesn't fit in their little box, they lose their faith and walk away. And this is why we want to be hard-hitting, why we want to teach very deeply and not just give you some nice sermons so that you can say the church was nice today. I want you to walk away thinking more about the fact that God is transcendent. This means that he is beyond our understanding fully. We can only know about him what he reveals to us and what we're willing to receive. Meaning that if he's eternal as well, I continually say this because it's important because we lose sight of it. God is eternal, which means we could be learning about God every minute of every day and still coming up short of the vastness of who he is. He's in fact indescribable in his fullness. We can only describe him in relation to us, in his relationship with us, not in any complete way that we say, I understand all that is God. We can't know that, but we know enough to stay along the way with all the bumps that may come along with it. So leading up to the cross, leading up to the triumphal entry, Jesus did a couple miracles, and there's a couple teachings that actually have some really good things to teach us. And I really want to focus on the resurrection of Lazarus today. Lazarus was Mary and Martha's brother, and very beloved to Jesus, was a disciple. And we learn in John chapter 11 that Lazarus dies. And now the family had called for Jesus when he was sick, saying, come, come, come. But Jesus delayed. And they were upset with Jesus. When Jesus arrived, and I'll read it to you here in just a moment, it says that basically, where were you? If you were here, this wouldn't have happened. And many times in our lives, we can say, God, where are you? Why are you allowing this to happen? If only you were here. And we learn a very powerful lesson because Jesus knew that Lazarus was going to die and didn't do anything. Why? Because Jesus is about the ministry of bringing the most people to faith as possible to rescue the most. And Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead caused more glory and more discipleship and more people coming to faith than making a sick man well. So understand this. God is not out to give us a cushy life. He will prosper us. Look at the land that we live in. No one has ever lived throughout history in the way that we do if we have, hot water in our homes and a couple bucks in our pocket. No one has ever lived like this throughout entire history. God has prospered us and made us comfortable. But that's not his number one mission. His number one mission is to seek and save those that are lost. So if I need to die and be resurrected again in order for someone else to come to faith, then we must say to God, so be it. If I must die and go to heaven and claim my reward early, then God must have the back end of what I would be missing doing here on earth. He would raise up others. We must hold our lives that loosely. This is why Jesus said, those who love their lives will lose them, and those who lose their lives for my sake will gain eternity. And so we must look at the circumstances in our life and asking, God, what are you doing? How does this bring you the most glory? And how can I be a faithful part of that mission? If we have that as a mindset, we will be able to conquer mountains. We will be able to bring the faith to everyone on earth. And this is what is required of the disciple. So with that, I pray that the scars that you have gone through in this world, that God will teach you to have wisdom with that you're going to help somebody else to avoid those scars in the future. So let's look at a couple of things. So beyond just Lazarus getting sick and dying and being raised from the dead, we learn that there's the teaching in Luke, he brings it up, saying of the 10 minas, where Jesus talks about a master going away, and he gives his servants, the ones in administrative authority, different sets of money to be able to look after. 10 to 1, 5 to 1, and then 1 to the other. And upon his return, he gives an account and asks, what have you done with the money that I've given you? Well, the one that made 10, he goes, hey, I've doubled the money and got 10. The one who had 5 said, hey, I've had 5, now I have 5 more. And Jesus in turn went, well done, good and faithful servants. You have been faithful with little, now I will give you much. You are now in charge of 10 cities, and you, sir, are in charge of 5 cities. Then the one who had the 1 said, I hid it in a cloth. I kept it protected because I was scared of you. I didn't want to lose it. So here's your mina back. And the Lord was very upset with him, saying, you could have at least put it on bank to get interest, but you did nothing because you were a wicked, lazy servant. And so with that, we learn that we have talents that we should be employing in God's kingdom. And so as we learn that, we learn that God is going to reward people for their work. And it may not be here on this world, but it might, but it definitely will be in heaven. And we should not shrink back. You see, with this, what is interesting is there's not a case here where somebody had the mina and then lost it, which was the quantity of money. The mina basically represented Christianity. And so with that, if you have Christ and you give him to someone else and invest that, it's never going to return void. So that's just why there's not one. Don't be afraid of using your gift because it won't return void. God will make sure that it prospers. And so with this, it tells us that's an indication that when we get to heaven, God is going to reward us based upon our faithfulness. So that yes, everybody who believes will get heaven, but each of us will have different rewards in his kingdom based upon our faithfulness. So he's teaching that right before he goes. So I can understand partially why the disciples are thinking an earthly kingdom, because Jesus is talking about giving 10 cities and 5 cities, and they're thinking like, okay, so Jesus is going to be the ruler, and there's magistrates over these cities, and then there's governors over groups of cities. So like, yeah, okay, so if we're the faithful ones, we're going to be the sub-rulers, we're going to be the governors or the cabinet ministers. But what they didn't quite realize is that yes, there is going to be an earthly kingdom, but Jesus said the king was going to go away first and then come back. So they fixated on the reward, but not on how to be faithful in the middle. So I want to encourage you with that these guys put to work while their master was away. Then the reward came. But the disciples were focused on governing 10 cities, thinking they had already been faithful enough. No, for them, it was just getting started. And this is why we continue to do that work between the first and second coming of Jesus Christ, that he has given us things and he is going to ask an account. With what did I give you, did you do? This is going to be a very powerful thing for us. So these are some of the last words Jesus taught. So we should take it to heart that he wants us to be active. If he went to the cross, we can at least put him at the front and forbearance of our life. And to help us to understand that there's a whole way that we should be running our lives is after him. Our jobs, our families, everything is meant to glorify him. And we can't miss the things that Jesus is teaching, even in the healings that he's doing. For example, on his way to Jerusalem, this is where he heals the blind men. And in talking about the spiritual blindness of the people in Jerusalem, he uses that as a teaching tool. We learn of the mother's request, asking James and John to be at the right and left hand of Jesus, realizing that, again, she too was thinking about position and on this earthly planet, instead of being the faithful servant while the king is away. We also learn of the rich and young ruler and Zacchaeus, We learn about that in Luke. Well, we learn about in all of them, but Luke kind of succinctly puts it up when Jesus gives a parable of saying that there was a Pharisee who was basically prideful and going up to the temple with his hands outstretched and saying, God, I give you tithe of all my earnings and I obey all your commands and have done so for years. Basically saying, aren't you glad that I'm on your team, God? And then there was another man, a tax collector, who was a sinner, who ended up not even approaching the temple, couldn't even look at it, but bowed down and beat his breast and said, Lord, have mercy on me, a sinner. And Jesus asked, which one went home justified? So then we learn Jesus encounters a rich young ruler, and he says, I have done all the righteous things my whole life long. What is it left that I should do? He was obviously feeling there was something not right. Jesus said, sell your possessions and give to the poor and come follow me. Now, we understand that is not a blanket statement to everybody, although it could be. If we're greedy, God might tell us to dispossess all of our belongings and follow him. But this man clearly had some sort of greed issue and wouldn't let it go. And he looked at his own little kingdom, and because he had great wealth, he walked away from Jesus. What could you possibly have that is worth more than following Jesus? What would it take if Jesus asked me to get rid of something that I would walk away from him? And that poor man, who was very rich, is actually very poor, and we have no idea where he is today. So that was the example of the rich young ruler, because he ran into a rich young ruler. Then, on his way through Jericho, we know the old nursery rhyme. Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. And he was a tax collector who was of short stature, couldn't see Jesus for the crowd. So he climbed a sycamore tree in Jericho just to be able to see Jesus. Jesus calls him down and goes to his house. And people are even saying, like, why would you sup with sinners? And Jesus said, salvation has come to this man today. So on one day, this man was saved, and he had the full rights and privileges of being a Christian. He didn't have to have some sort of form of penance. He didn't have to work in the nursery first. He didn't have to do something to prove himself. He was welcomed fully into the fellowship of Jesus Christ the moment that he believed. And that was the tax collector that was in that parable. So we learn about not to judge those, because God can bring people to faith in just a moment. So let us never give up praying. Let's never get proud in our circumstances like the rich young ruler. And let us make sure that we don't shun those who come to faith and think they need to earn their way up first. No, bring them into the fellowship and let the world be stunned at our generosity and the love of Christ flowing through us. So these are the teachings that Jesus is bringing right before he goes into it, talking about watch your expectations of who you admire and who you desire to fellowship with. Watch out for spiritual blindness, and watch out for you having a false expectation of a real kingdom. Will come, but not yet. The master's got to go and come back. And he's doing all of this teaching to help his disciples to really realize it. But you know what? In all of those circumstances, they botched it. They were spiritually blind. They did think the earthly kingdom was coming right away. They did think they were going to get positions at the left and right of Jesus. And they did still covet a position like the Pharisee did. And they still, it took a while for them to realize we should be welcoming the ones that Jesus welcomed. But you know what? They knew enough, though, that they hung in there. Yes, their faith got scattered. They went along the way. But they ended up staying and persevering. So don't put God in a box. Always be open to what new things God might be doing. New as in actions in your life, not new as in Scripture. We have the canon of Scripture this is what the Word of God is between his first and second coming. It is obviously plausible that when he returns, he has the authority and the great pleasure of writing whatever new he wants. But until that return, we celebrate the reading of his Word, which we're going to do now, to read not only just the spiritual blindness of the Pharisees in this particular day. So Jesus brings about a great resurrection in Lazarus, and we learn that makes a lot of people want to kill him. That sounds like not intuitive, but we're going to read it, and you're going to see why. It was, again, because of pride of life and desire to keep power for oneself selfishly instead of being selfless. So why don't we read it together? We're in John chapter 11, verses 38 to 57. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. Take the stone away, he said. But Lord, said Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you if you believed you would see the glory of God? So they took the stone away. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of those standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. When he had said this, Jesus called out in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. But some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. Then the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the Sanhedrin. "What are we accomplishing?" they asked. "Here this man is performing miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and then the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." Then one of them, named Caiaphas, who was the high priest that year, spoke up. "You know nothing at all. You do not realize it is better for one man to die for his people and then for the whole nation to perish." He did not say this on his own, but the high priest that year prophesied that Jesus would die for the Jewish nation, not only for the nation, but also for the scattered children of God, to bring them together and to make them one. So from that day, they plotted to take his life. Therefore, Jesus no longer moved about publicly amongst the Jews. Instead, he withdrew to the region near the desert, to a village called Ephraim, where he stayed with his disciples. When it was almost time for the Jewish Passover, many went up from the country to Jerusalem for the ceremonial cleansing before the Passover. They kept looking for Jesus as they stood in the temple area and asked one another, "What do you think? Is he coming to the feast at all?" But the chief priests and the Pharisees had given order that if anyone found out where Jesus was, he should report it so that they might arrest him. So again, there's a lot of misunderstanding here. Martha and Mary are upset that Jesus was late to the party. They had asked where he was, and we can learn about that more if you read the preceding verses in chapter 11 of John. I encourage you to do that as homework, to go look at in each of the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, go read the few chapters before the triumphal entry. We need to be doing more about our faith and growing and understanding what God is doing in this world so that we can be effective, and we're not going to be blind in our generation as they were. So this is the whole point of this, is like, how can we make sure that we are wide awake in the generation, in the country, in the town, in the city that we find ourselves in? We must be that diligent. And so we learn here that a lot of people had showed up. Lazarus was popular. And we see that a lot of people showed up basically for his funeral and to help with the mourning. You know, that by delaying, that meant there was a crowd. So when Jesus came late, he knew all along that he was going to do this. And in fact, he was even sad that it even happened. And yet he knew what he was going to do, but he still cried. So Jesus still does, even though he is doing what's best for the glory of the kingdom. He still weeps with us when we weep. He's still sad for the things that have happened to you. And he's going to make it better. In Lazarus, in this whole account, he is giving so much hope for everybody. What he's saying is, I'm crying with you for this temporary pain, but it's going to be for a greater glory and your resurrection. Not just Lazarus, for all of ours. God weeps over the things that have hurt us, but he is going to use it for a greater glory and our resurrection. It's even a typecast of himself. They didn't believe that a resurrection could happen. And so Jesus talking about himself that he was going to raise from the dead was a bit perplexing to them. Was he being serious? Was he being allegorical? And then he does the exact same thing that happened to him, but only a short time later. Look at Lazarus, wrapped in linens, put in a tomb, and left there for days. But except Jesus called Lazarus out, Jesus called himself out so long ago. And he took off his own burial clothes, and he rolled away the stone. How amazing is that? That very typecast of rolling away the stone, like they already had the image in their head just a couple weeks before this would happen. And just a couple weeks before it would happen to Jesus. And let this be known to us that as he was teaching them, knowing that they would still get it wrong, they would eventually get it right, and right enough to stay along the way. And now let's flip to the Pharisees' reaction. They clearly wanted to keep their place. In fact, God was even trying to warn them, because even Caiaphas, the high priest, was given a prophecy by God. And it was a correct prophecy, but interpreted wrongly. And knowing that Jesus was going to die, because Jesus was very popular and was being known all over Jewish communities around the world. So we don't know what was reasoning in his head to interpret it that way, but we suppose it to be that they were worried about their Jesus followers being so popular that they would cause a revolution, which would cause the Romans to smite it and then destroy. Much like what happened in the book of Daniel, that we learned what happened with the Babylonians taking out Israel. So they're afraid of the Romans repeating that. And so they wanted to quash that. And as that continued with them, they thought that Jesus dying, that he'd be famous enough, but that it would prompt people to come back home, that were Jews scattered all over the world. And they were hoping for that, because if Jews from all over the known world at that time had come back, they could have very easily outrun the Romans. And so they misinterpreted, because they had their own position, their own power, and their own ways on their minds, so that even when God prophesied to them, they took it selfishly. Let us humble ourselves to make sure that we are putting ourselves second and God first in every situation. If we put our pride before, it's going to become with a great fall. And these Pharisees sure did. Can you imagine sentencing Jesus to death? And then you heard that he's resurrected, but you still don't believe. And then yet when you die and you think you've been praying to the right God, and then when you show up at the pearly gates that it's Jesus there greeting you, that'd be a pretty scary thing. Let us make sure that our eyes are wide open, that Jesus will never say to any of us, I never knew you. But may he welcome us into his home with praise. May we be acknowledged before God in heaven as we acknowledge Christ here on the earth. So I want to encourage you to see it through, to grow in your faith, and to grow in your knowledge. And not just your knowledge. The Pharisees knew it all. At least they thought they did. They had a great education. But because they were selfish, it took them on a wild bent. Humble people get the gospel. And when the gospel gets to people, it humbles them if it does its true work. So I want to encourage you. There's going to be things that are going to make you question where God is, just like Mary. Jesus, if you were here, this wouldn't have happened. Where were you? There's probably times in your life where you're wondering, God, where were you? And you know what? God is there all the time, and he can bring the most out of every situation. So it is interesting, too. I notice a couple things when people go to higher education. Sometimes churches make faith a little too simple in the sense that we think, well, this is going to happen, and you do that, and you don't do that, and then there you go. And then when you study deeper, you start to make it all fall apart. You know, we start questioning the validity of miracles when teens go off to university, and the first drink of science makes you become an atheist. But if you keep drinking that, you're going to start thinking, wow, if you keep studying, you're going to actually learn. You know, it's going to shake you in the beginning because you've learned things you've never learned before. And you might wonder, well, maybe were those things miracles or was it just scientific happenings? So a little bit of knowledge is going to make you have a simple faith. A little bit more knowledge is going to shake your faith. But if you see it through, that some of the most brilliant scientists who have ever lived have been very faithful Christians because they take the approach that now that we have learned so much that none of this could have happened without a supernatural creator. And to us to peer deep into the rocks, deep into the earth, or deep into biology, into the cells in our body, we are looking at a master craftsman, and we are looking at an incredible creative God who put the world together, and their faith deepens. So there's going to be something comes along your way that you're going to learn that's going to shake your faith. But if you see it through, you'll grow. The flip side, too, I've known teenagers who have gone off to Bible college, and they're like, oh, wow, it just seemed like we just really dissected God. And it just was really off-putting. Why? Because they were looking at different angles of looking at Scripture, and it threw their little simple faith off. Don't put God in a box. If you just have God in a box, you think he's always going to do this or that, you're going to be shaken one day. But if you see it through, you know what, there's people that know way more than the second-year Bible student that keeps going on and studying theology, that we learn the intricacies. And the reason why it looks like we're dissecting God is because we, as limited beings, are trying to understand an unlimited God. And we don't want just a simple faith. We want to go after God with everything. So I want to encourage you, even as you study theology going deeper, something is going to actually make you question God by studying theology. But keep on the way. It's not a destination. Don't settle for a simple faith. The Lord needs you to be strong so that we can be the people he wants us to be in our day and generation, wherever we may be on this earth. We all have a purpose, so let's get to it. I want to encourage you that as we go, but always to remember that I like to preach the gospel in every single message, and that is as simple as this. People interpret the signs around us in an incorrect way. And so with that, with a biblical lens, we can learn this broken world that we live in, as people say, why does a loving God allow all this to happen? And we say this, a loving God made it perfect, and he gave it to us. It is humanity that botched it, and he will fix it if we believe in his son and follow him and trust him for salvation. And then we will go to be with him forever in heaven, where he will make everything right. But for now, he is asking us to pay attention and look that it is humanity that broke it. We should be looking at the difficulties in the world and saying, wow, there's something really wrong with the human race, and we are in desperate need of a savior. That is how the biblical lens we should look at the world. And then with that, we can say that while the time between now and when Christ returns, that we can just be his faithful witness and his faithful servant, doing good and sharing the good news of Jesus Christ wherever we go. So wherever you may find yourself today, I pray that you know that God loves you, that God is going to train you, and that God is going to use you in your own unique, special way. So as you go, thank the Lord for his salvation for you, but also don't compare yourself with anybody else. God made you for a reason. Thank you for tuning in. God bless you. Have a great day. I'm really thankful you've taken the time to watch these broadcasts of ours where we're teaching and putting the good news of Jesus Christ forward. I'd love to get connected with you. I know there are hundreds of people that I don't know yet who watch our material, and I'd love to get connected with you to either help you with questions you might have about your faith, to help you get connected to use your gifts in ministry, and to see what we could possibly do together to see the Lord do great things in our city and beyond. And so it's an easy way for you to get connected to us is by going on our website at regalchurch.com or emailing us at the office at regalchurch.com your information. We have an electronic communication card on our website. You can get connected to us on Facebook via Messenger and other things like that. So we encourage you that you've watched it. Now let's get connected and see what God can do with you and me in the future as we go ahead. Now, for those of us who believe in the mission of Jesus Christ and want to see it go forward, I want to encourage you that we know that the Bible teaches us to use our time, talent, and treasures to make sure that this good news of Jesus Christ and lots of help goes out to the world. And so with that, we have an email where you can give an email money transfer or hit the address to the church that you can send a check or drop by on church on Sunday. We don't ask offering from our guests, nor do we ask it from those who don't believe. It is a privilege that we as Christians get to give joyfully and be a part of God's mission. That one day when we go to heaven, God is going to point out people that because of our efforts, that we helped to get them to heaven. So I encourage you to do this. Generosity is something that many of us do here at the church in order to make sure that this gospel goes out from us. It came to us at a high price, so let's see it, that we can be faithful stewards of this message of Jesus Christ and the love that comes from helping others along the way, to see that this gets done and modeled for many others in the days and years ahead. I want to give a heartfelt thanks for those that do give. Your sacrificial giving has made a difference and has reached thousands.